I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin our story tonight, I want you to take a moment just for you. Settle in, get comfortable, and let the weight of the day begin to melt away. Whatever you did today, whatever challenges you faced, you did your best. You made a great effort, and that is more than enough. I am proud of you for getting through it. And now, your time is your own. There is nothing left to do but to relax, to breathe, and to listen. Let your mind drift as we travel back in time, not with the jarring flash of a time machine, but like a gently turning page in an old book. We are going to a world without the hum of the highway, a world lit by gaslight and powered by steam and sinew, a world of horses and carriages, of vast, quiet farmlands under an endless sky. Our story begins on a farm in Greenfield Township, Michigan, on a summer day in 1863. In the midst of the American Civil War, a boy named Henry was born. He was the first of William and Mary Ford's children to survive infancy. His world was the rhythm of the seasons, the tilling of soil, the rising and setting of the sun. His father, William, saw a future for Henry in the rich soil of the family farm. He hoped his son would one day take over, continuing the legacy of working the land. But young Henry's heart did not beat in time with the seasons. It beat in time with the ticking of a watch. From his earliest years, he was not interested in the natural world of plants and animals, but in the mechanical world of gears and levers. He was a tinkerer, a deconstructor. His friends and family would bring him their broken timepieces, and with his small, nimble fingers, he would carefully disassemble them, diagnose the problem, and piece them back together, making them whole again. It was more than a hobby. It was an obsession. He saw the world not as a farmer, but as an engineer. A watch, to him, was a perfect little universe of interconnected parts, each with a purpose, all working in harmony. This fascination with the inner workings of things would become the driving force of his entire life. At 16, against his father's wishes, Henry left the farm. He walked to the nearby city of Detroit, a burgeoning hub of industry. The city was a symphony of noise and motion that the quiet farm could never offer. He found work as an apprentice machinist, and for the next few years, he moved from one shop to another, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. He learned about steam engines, the mighty hearts that powered the factories of the Industrial Revolution. He returned to the farm for a time, but he wasn't the same boy who had left. He operated and serviced steam engines for other farmers, and even ran a sawmill his father gave him. He married a woman named Clara Bryant, who would become his lifelong companion and supporter. They had a son, Edsel. For a moment it seemed he might settle into a comfortable life, balancing his mechanical inclinations with the duties of family and land. But the city and a new flickering idea called electricity called to him once more. In 1891, Henry moved his young family back to Detroit and took a job as an engineer for the Edison Illuminating Company. He was a good employee, and his natural talent for mechanics saw him promoted quickly. But his real work began after his shift ended. In a small brick shed behind his rented house, late into the night, Henry Ford worked on a dream. He wasn't trying to build a better steam engine. He was captivated by a newer, more volatile power, the internal combustion engine. An engine that created power not from boiling water, but from a controlled explosion of gasoline vapor. While Clara held a kerosene lamp, he tinkered and toiled, building his engine from scratch, using scrap metal and parts he fashioned himself. On Christmas Eve of 1893, he brought his first small one-cylinder engine into the kitchen and clamped it to the sink. With Clara's help feeding the gasoline, the engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life, shaking the entire room. It was a moment of pure creation. He had tamed the explosion. But an engine alone was not the goal. The engine needed a body, a purpose. And so, for the next 2.5 years, he worked tirelessly in that small shed. He built a frame, attached 4 bicycle wheels, a simple tiller for steering, and a gearbox with 2 speeds forward, but no reverse. On a rainy night in June of 1896, the moment came. His creation was finished. He called it the quadricycle. But as he prepared to show the world his invention, he realized a critical oversight. The quadricycle was wider than the door of his shed. Unfazed, with an axe in hand, Henry Ford simply knocked down the brick wall of his workshop, and in the early hours of the morning, pushed his first horseless carriage out into the rain-slicked streets of Detroit. It was loud, it was clumsy, but it moved under its own power. The dream was real. He was no longer just a tinkerer. He was a builder, an inventor, and he was about to change the world. The quadricycle was more of a curiosity than a commercial product, a proof of concept that rattled through the Detroit streets, startling horses and captivating onlookers. It gave Henry the confidence to dream bigger. He sold his first creation to finance his second. His work at the Edison Company had put him in the same circles as the great Thomas Edison himself, who, upon hearing of Henry's gasoline engine, encouraged him, telling him, "Young man, that's the thing. You have it. Keep at it." This encouragement from his hero was all the validation Henry needed. He soon found wealthy investors who were intrigued by the promise of the horseless carriage. In 1899, he left his job at the Edison Company to help form the Detroit Automobile Company. For the first time, he had a dedicated space and resources to build his vehicles. But the transition from inventor to businessman was not a smooth one. Henry was obsessed with perfecting his designs, constantly tinkering and improving, while his investors were impatient for a return on their money. They wanted to build cars for the wealthy, luxurious machines that could be sold for a high profit. Henry, however, was already nurturing a different vision, a vision of a car that was simple, reliable, and affordable for the common man. The company produced very few cars, and after just over a year, it was dissolved. It was his first great failure. Undeterred, Henry believed the problem wasn't his cars, but the business model. He knew he needed to prove his machines were not just novelties, but robust and powerful vehicles. In the early 20th century, the best way to do that was through racing. He designed and built a powerful race car he named Sweepstakes. In October of 1901, he entered a high-profile race against Alexander Winton, who was at the time the most famous and accomplished race car driver in America. Henry had almost no experience in racing. He was a builder, not a driver, but he got behind the wheel himself. Winton's car was the heavy favorite. As the race began, Winton took a commanding lead, but Henry's car was lighter and, crucially, more reliable. As the laps wore on, Winton's vehicle began to sputter with engine trouble. Henry, steady and relentless, kept his machine running. He passed Winton and, to the shock of the crowd, won the race. The victory made him a local hero overnight and, more importantly, attracted new investors. With this new backing, he founded the Henry Ford Company. But again, conflict arose. Henry's focus was still on developing a smaller, more affordable car, while his chief investor, William Murphy, brought in a consultant named Henry Leland to oversee the operation. Leland was a master of precision manufacturing, but he and Ford clashed immediately. Within a year, Henry Ford walked away from the company that bore his name, vowing never again to be beholden to investors who did not share his vision. As a testament to Leland's skill, the remnants of the Henry Ford Company were reorganized, and it was renamed for the founder of Detroit, Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac. The Cadillac Automobile Company was born from Henry's second failure. These failures would have broken a lesser man, but for Henry, they were lessons. He now knew two things with absolute certainty. First, that his cars were good, and second, that he needed to be in complete control of his own company. So, in 1903, he tried a third time. With capital raised from a dozen investors, including the Dodge brothers, who would later found their own car company, the Ford Motor Company was born. This time, it was different. Henry was the vice president and chief engineer, and he held the controlling vision. He had a simple philosophy: I will build a car for the great multitude. He began by producing a series of models, identified by letters of the alphabet: the Model A, the Model B, the Model C. Each was an iteration, an improvement on the last. He was still searching for the perfect combination of simplicity, strength, and affordability. Some models were larger and more expensive, aimed at appeasing his partners. But his heart was always set on that universal car. The breakthrough came in 1908. After years of experimentation, after running through 19 letters of the alphabet, he finally created the car that would fulfill his promise. It was called the Model T. It was not flashy, it was not luxurious, but it was everything he had envisioned. It was made from the best materials, including a new kind of vanadium steel that was much stronger than what other car makers were using. It was simple to operate, and critically, it was easy to repair with basic tools. Its high ground clearance made it perfect for the rutted, muddy roads of rural America. It was a car for the farmer, the doctor, the salesman. He affectionately called it the Tin Lizzie. And it would not just launch a company into the stratosphere, it would fundamentally reshape the face of the modern world. The Model T was an instant success. In its first year, Ford sold over 10,000 of them, a remarkable number for the time. But for Henry Ford, this was just the beginning. The demand for his car was astonishing, and it quickly outstripped his ability to produce it. The traditional method of building a car was a slow, craftsman-like process. A team of workers would gather around a stationary chassis, and they would build the car from the ground up, with men running back and forth to grab parts and tools. It was inefficient and time-consuming. Henry knew that to make his car truly affordable for everyone, he had to build it faster, much faster. He became obsessed with efficiency. He and his engineers studied other industries, from the clock makers with their interchangeable parts to the Chicago meat-packing plants, where carcasses were moved along on an overhead trolley from one worker to the next. This last idea, bringing the work to the man instead of the man to the work, sparked a revolution. In 1913, at his new factory in Highland Park, Michigan, Henry Ford implemented a grand experiment. He broke down the assembly of a Model T into 84 distinct steps. He trained his workers to do just one of those steps, over and over and over again. Then he built a moving line, a simple system of ropes and pulleys at first, dragging a car chassis along the factory floor at a controlled speed. Each worker stood in their spot, performed their single task, be it attaching a wheel, tightening a bolt, or installing a magneto. and then the chassis would move on to the next station. The result was nothing short of miraculous. Before the moving assembly line, it took over 12 hours of labor to assemble a single Model T. Within a few months of introducing the new system, that time dropped to just 93 minutes. It was a revolution in manufacturing. Production soared. Ford was able to build cars at a rate the world had never seen, and as efficiency went up, the price of the car went down. Ford passed his savings directly to the consumer. A Model T that cost $825 in 1908 was sold for just $360 a few years later. It became so affordable that many of the people who built the car could now actually buy one for themselves. This was the fulfillment of Henry's dream. The car was no longer a toy for the rich. It was a tool for the masses. It liberated families from the isolation of rural life. It allowed them to travel to new places, to seek new opportunities. It changed where people could live, where they could work, and how they spent their leisure time. The American landscape itself began to change, with paved roads, gas stations, and motels sprouting up to serve a newly mobile population. The factory at Highland Park was a marvel of the modern age, a humming, clanking, non-stop river of steel and rubber. But the work itself was grueling. The relentless pace of the moving line was physically and mentally exhausting. Workers were no longer craftsmen. They were cogs in a vast, impersonal machine, performing the same monotonous task hundreds of times a day. The noise was deafening, the work was dangerous, and the pressure was immense. The consequence was a massive turnover rate. Workers would quit after just a few months, sometimes even a few weeks. In 1913, to keep a workforce of 14,000 men, Ford had to hire over 52,000. This constant churn of training new people was a major inefficiency, and if there was one thing Henry Ford could not tolerate, it was inefficiency. He needed a way to stabilize his workforce. His solution would be just as radical and just as world-changing as the assembly line itself. In January of 1914, Henry Ford made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the industrial world. He declared that the Ford Motor Company would more than double the average wage for its factory workers, from around $2.34 a day to a flat $5 a day. It was an unprecedented, almost unthinkable amount of money for assembly line work. The day after the announcement, 10,000 men lined up outside the Highland Park factory, hoping for a job. The $5 day was hailed by many as an act of incredible generosity. But for Henry, it was first and foremost a brilliant business decision. The high wage dramatically reduced employee turnover. Workers were now desperate to keep their well-paying jobs, so they tolerated the grueling conditions of the assembly line. Absenteeism plummeted, and productivity soared even higher. But the $5 day was also a profound act of social engineering. Ford reasoned that if he paid his workers enough to afford the cars they were building, he would be creating his own customers. It was the birth of a new economic principle, that mass production is best supported by mass consumption. By creating a stable, well-paid working class, he was helping to build the very middle-class consumer society that would drive the American economy for the next century. However, the $5 wage came with strings attached. It was not a right but a privilege, and it was only available to men who met certain standards. Ford established what he called a sociological department. Investigators from this department would visit the homes of his employees to ensure they were living a proper life. They checked that the homes were clean, that the workers were not drinking excessively, that their wives were not working outside the home, and that their children were attending school. They were, in essence, paid to be good citizens, according to Henry Ford's specific paternalistic standards. If a worker failed the inspection, he would be put on probation and his wages cut in half until he reformed. It was a level of corporate intrusion into private life that was deeply controversial, but for thousands of workers, it was a price worth paying for a life-changing wage. As his company grew into an industrial empire, Henry Ford's ambitions grew with it. The Highland Park plant, once a symbol of modernity, was no longer big enough. Ford envisioned an even grander facility, a place where raw materials would enter at one end and finished automobiles would roll out the other. He found a massive tract of land along the River Rouge, southwest of Detroit. There, he built the Rouge plant. It was not just a factory, it was a self-contained industrial city. It had its own steel mill, its own glass factory, its own power plant, and its own docks where massive ships would arrive, carrying iron ore from Ford-owned mines in Michigan and coal from Ford-owned mines in Kentucky. Everything was integrated. This vertical integration meant that Ford controlled every single step of the manufacturing process, from the raw material in the ground to the finished car driving off the lot. At its peak, the Rouge plant employed over 100,000 people. It was the largest manufacturing complex in the world, a monument to Henry Ford's relentless pursuit of efficiency and control. Now one of the richest and most famous men in the world, Ford began to turn his attention to matters beyond manufacturing. When World War I erupted in Europe in 1914, Ford, a staunch pacifist, was horrified by the slaughter. In 1915, he chartered a ship dubbed the Peace Ship and sailed for Europe with a delegation of pacifists and community leaders. His goal was simple and incredibly naive: He believed he could talk the leaders of Europe into ending the war. The mission was a disaster, mocked by the press and ignored by the warring nations. He returned home humiliated, learning the hard way that the world could not be organized as rationally as one of his factories. Henry Ford was a man of profound contradictions. He was a visionary who had lifted millions out of poverty and isolation, yet he harbored deep and troubling prejudices. In 1918, he purchased his local newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. He began using it as a mouthpiece for his personal views, and chief among them was a virulent and obsessive anti-Semitism. For years, the paper published a weekly series of articles titled "The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem." These articles were filled with conspiracy theories and hateful rhetoric, blaming Jewish people for everything from wars to economic instability. Because Ford required his car dealerships across the country to carry the newspaper in their showrooms, these views reached a massive audience, giving a dangerous legitimacy to paranoid and prejudiced ideas. The articles were eventually collected into a book and distributed internationally. It was a dark and shameful chapter in his life, one that would permanently tarnish his legacy as a great innovator. He was eventually forced to issue a public apology after being sued for libel, but the damage had been done. This rigid and often paranoid worldview also began to affect his company. The world was changing, but Henry Ford was not. For nearly 2 decades, the Model T had remained largely the same. It was reliable and affordable, but by the mid-1920s, it was hopelessly outdated. Competitors like General Motors were offering customers more stylish, more comfortable, and more powerful cars, with modern features like electric starters and a choice of colors. They also offered something Ford refused to: credit. Customers could buy a GM car by paying in monthly installments. Ford's sales plummeted. His own son, Edsel, who was the president of the company, pleaded with his father to develop a new car for the modern age. Edsel had a keen eye for style and design and understood that customers now wanted more than just basic transportation. But Henry stubbornly resisted. He saw the Model T as the perfect automobile, and any change was an admission of imperfection. He detested the idea of consumer credit, which he called the installment plan, believing it was a moral failing. The conflict between father and son was deep and painful. Henry, who had always needed absolute control, constantly undermined Edsel's authority, publicly humiliating him and countermanding his decisions. He created a climate of fear within the company, relying on his ruthless security chief, Harry Bennett, to spy on employees, including his own son. Finally, with the company on the brink of disaster, Henry was forced to relent. In 1927, he shut down his factories for months, laying off tens of thousands of workers to retool for a new car. It was an enormous and costly undertaking. The result was the Model A. It was a vast improvement over the Model T in every way, with a more powerful engine, a modern transmission, and a stylish design heavily influenced by Edsel. The Model A was a huge success and saved the company, but the battle to create it had taken a heavy toll on the relationship between Henry and his son. Throughout the 1930s, as the company faced the Great Depression and the rise of organized labor, Henry became even more entrenched in his ways. He violently opposed the formation of unions in his factories, viewing them as an unacceptable challenge to his authority. This led to brutal conflicts between Harry Bennett's security forces and union organizers, culminating in the infamous Battle of the Overpass in 1937. Tragically, Edsel Ford, a gentle and forward-thinking man who had spent his life in the shadow of his domineering father, died in 1943 from stomach cancer, his health likely worsened by the constant stress. Henry Ford, now an old man, was devastated. He briefly resumed the presidency of the company, but he was losing his grip on reality. His memory was failing, and his paranoia was deepening, leaving the vast Ford empire in the hands of the thuggish Harry Bennett. The company began to lose millions of dollars a month, and it seemed the great industrial giant was on the verge of collapse. As the United States entered World War II, Henry Ford, the old pacifist, set aside his former beliefs and turned his industrial might to the war effort. The Ford Motor Company became a cornerstone of the arsenal of democracy. Its most stunning achievement was the Willow Run factory, an enormous plant built specifically to produce B-24 Liberator bombers. Using the same assembly line principles he had pioneered for cars, Ford's factory was, at its peak, rolling out a finished four-engine bomber every single hour. It was a final, spectacular demonstration of the manufacturing genius that had defined his life. But within the company, things were falling apart. With Henry in his dotage and Edsel gone, the future of the Ford Motor Company looked bleak. It was Edsel's widow and Henry's wife, Clara, who staged what amounted to a family coup. They demanded that Henry step down and hand control of the company to his grandson, Edsel's son, Henry Ford II. They threatened to sell their stock if he refused, which would have cost the family its controlling interest. In 1945, the old man finally ceded control. His grandson, young and energetic, immediately fired the corrupt Harry Bennett and brought in a team of brilliant young executives to modernize and save the company. The Ford empire was secure. Henry Ford lived out his final years in quiet retirement at his estate, Fair Lane. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in April of 1947 at the age of 83. The power went out in his neighborhood that night due to a local flood, and so the man who had lit up the world with the power of the internal combustion engine and the hum of the assembly line died by candlelight just as he had been born. His legacy is a complicated one, a tapestry woven with threads of brilliant light and profound darkness. He was a visionary who put the world on wheels, who created a new middle class, and who perfected a system of production that defined an entire century. He was a farm boy who became the richest man in the world, a folk hero who embodied the American dream of the self-made man. But he was also a tyrant in his own factories, a man who crushed unions and used spies to enforce his will. He was a stubborn autocrat who nearly drove his own company into the ground because he refused to change. And he was a man who used his immense fame and fortune to promote messages of hate and division. He was a genius, and he was a flawed, prejudiced man. Both are true. He was a reflection of the best and the worst of his era. And now, as our story comes to a close, let the details fade. Let the complexities drift away. All that matters now is the stillness of the room around you, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. You have listened, you have learned, and now it is time to rest. Let the quiet of the past soothe you into a deep and peaceful sleep. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to think about. Just rest. Rest well.